Here are the three main things that I'd be looking for as a buyer if I was going to be buying a house in the second half of 2026 around Alpharetta or the greater Atlanta area. What's going on, guys? My name is Ryan Johnston. I'm a local real estate agent here, and we're just going to go through some of the tips and tricks. In today's video, we're going to dive into some of the seasonality that we typically see. This is being recorded in July of 2026. And as Alpharetta and the areas as a whole have shifted more towards a buyer's market or more balanced market, these are the things that would have been unfathomable a few years ago that I would specifically be looking for if I was buying a house myself, or what I encourage my clients to do when looking at homes. Now, the first one is going to be flexibility and contingencies. For so long, especially in the post COVID boom, we saw people removing all their contingencies, their inspection periods, foregoing appraisals, or just paying above ask on properties. That's just not really the case anymore. Now, there are pockets of great schools and neighborhoods where a home is just priced right, it shows really well, it's been renovated or staged nicely, maybe it's the spring market, and you do still get multiple offers. But for the most part, we are starting to see things sit a little bit longer, and that just puts the ability back in the buyer's hands to negotiate a little bit. So, the one thing I'm looking for is the fact that unless there's a specific reason to feel rushed, you shouldn't feel rushed. And that's not to say let a good house go by, but I don't think it's something where if you're looking at a property, maybe an older property or a historic property or something that's in clear need of repairs, give yourself time to get everything looked at. I can assure you, especially now with vendors, things cost way more than people think they do to try and get fixed afterwards. It's good to go in knowing that once you move in, you can enjoy the home and you're not going to have to worry about stuff as much. So, as far as an inspection contingency, our due diligence period in Georgia allows for a buyer to back out of a contract for any reason under the sun and still retain your earnest money. Now, with this in mind, at a bare minimum, if I'm working with a buyer, I try to encourage 5 days, ideally 7, depending on the property. And that gives you time to really just get everything looked at. Get your home inspector in there. Maybe there's a roof issue. You want to check the sewer line and scope it out to the street to make sure no tree roots have gotten in there. And then you go back to the seller and basically have your second round of negotiating. Now, this allows you to kind of go into it of, okay, are we going to back out of the property and we know that, hey, we just paid for the inspection fee, but we saved ourselves a lot of time, money, and headache on the back end? Or is it something that you can come to terms with and you feel more comfortable about moving forward with the property? So making sure you get adequate time for that inspection contingency is huge. I never recommend foregoing an inspection contingency or even really just a right to inspect because it really limits your options going forward. Now, as far as contingencies go, that's going to be the biggest one we see. Depending on your financing situation, we would be looking at a potential financing contingency and appraisal contingency as well. These are also things I would not be in any rush to diminish time wise or forego completely. Give yourself an opportunity to qualify for the loan, look at different lender options, find the lender that's going to work for you, and make sure that in this market currently, you're not overpaying for a house just because, unless you absolutely have to. Maybe you are going into the multiple offer situation. Maybe an appraisal does come in low and the seller is just unwilling to deal with dropping the price and you can bridge the gap. All right, fine. I mean, there are definitely times when you don't want to let a house go, but for the most part, a healthy finance contingency gives you time to get your ducks in a row. Everyone's super busy, especially with summer. If you have kids, things going on in work, you want to make sure that the loan is going to be approved without a problem and you're just paying for what the house is actually worth. Now, the appraisal is going to be a third-party independent appraiser randomly assigned from the lender if you are financing. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about if it's someone that the buyer is choosing or if it's the seller's choosing. Now, clearly, if it's a cash transaction, you can put down that you have an option to still have the property appraised and there is an appraisal contingency, but that's just something to be more mindful of. One of the big things that we do see sellers still ask for is temporary occupancy post-closing. As a seller, they're going to want to close as quickly as possible to make sure that they have their funds and they're done with it, but they either want time to move out, maybe they're moving into a second property, or they're just not ready to get all of their stuff out. And that's something you have to weigh with your real estate agent of the pros and cons. I assure you, most people, especially agents, don't fully understand the home sale contingency, and what goes into a potential temporary occupancy contingency. A temporary occupancy after closing can cause all sorts of problems. You're almost entering into a lease agreement, but a lot of people use a 1 to 2 page document to try to make this efficient and bridge all of the what if gaps. That is just not how it goes. And we have seen more things go wrong with the temp occupancy exhibits than anything else. So, whether you have questions, I'm happy to address them. If you have comments down below, I'll definitely read everything you guys post and try to get answers to any questions you may have. But those are some things that I would consider. So, I would look at the inspection contingency, your finance appraisal contingencies, be mindful of a temporary occupancy request, and also think about if you have a home to sell. We are seeing more offers get accepted with home sale contingencies right now than we have seen in the past 5 years. So there are multiple different options to talk about with your lender, whether you're going to potentially do a bridge loan if you're trying to forego a home sale contingency, or a potentially buy before you sell program. Each lender is going to operate a little bit differently. We have seen tons of offers come through and get accepted with home sale contingencies. I had a client that just bought new construction. Obviously, the builder is trying to get as many of their new construction properties under contract as possible so that they get the dominoes to fall to keep building. They were happy to accept a home sale contingency, and they just wanted updates to see, were we actually marketing the home properly? Were we priced appropriately? And were we doing our part to try and get a buyer on that property and get the dominoes to fall? Now, number two is kind of piggybacking on the inspection period, is going to be home repairs. I would not worry about pushing through a contract with a property that has extensive home repairs in need, where the seller just isn't really willing to do anything or giving any type of concessions for it. This is something we see all the time. One thing I tell buyers to be extremely mindful of: if a roof is older than 15 years old, not only have we seen a lot of insurance companies not want to insure or require a roof actually be replaced prior to getting homeowners insurance, but the cost of all these things has skyrocketed the past few years. I've had to personally replace 3 HVACs in the past 2 years, and what used to be a $4,000 or $5,000 repair or expense is now 10,000 plus in some scenarios. So there's a lot of things we run into, especially when it comes to like mold, crawl spaces, moisture issues. Really make sure you're digging into the property and trying to actually get things repaired or a proper concession. And if that involves trying to extend due diligence or negotiate a second time, I highly encourage it. Because the worst thing is you go and close on a property and all of these things are just looming over your future enjoyment of being in that house. And that's what we really want to avoid. A home is supposed to be your sanctuary. Buying a home is a major life step and it's a big deal. And you don't want to be dealing with all of this stress of moving and payments and mortgages and everything that goes into homeownership, then to just constantly get hit with all of these repairs along the way. So when we're looking at properties, especially out with showings, I typically try to look at anything that is going to be a major repair expense to be in mind when we're crafting an offer, or structuring that in response to an amendment to address concerns as part of what comes up on the home inspection. So number two, home repairs, definitely consider that, as well as renovations. You know, one of the biggest expenses is that the home is not necessarily fully finished, or the basement is unfinished, but you love the rest of the house, or the kitchen is dated, or all the bathrooms are dated. These are all massive expenses. And I can tell you, once you get into a property, you start seeing the little things and you start wishing that they had been done on the front end. Sometimes it makes more sense to pay a little bit more for the house to know that you don't have to deal with those, because a lot of the money people put in on renovations, they're not necessarily going to get out on the back end. I've run into this personally. We bought a house with a very partially finished basement, did not make sense for us. The backyard also was okay, but needed a lot of work. It wasn't flat, a lot of pine straw, and the deck was basically falling apart. So now that we're in the house, we love everything about the neighborhood, the community, and the house itself. But you have three huge expenses on the horizon of dealing with the basement, the deck, the backyard. And then once all of those are done and updated, it starts making everything else stand out that also isn't updated. And you kind of have to look at it of, if I had to move and all of a sudden, let's say I relocated or something where I had to sell this house, what is somebody else going to see that is also going to cause a potential issue? So think about home repairs, Think about what the renovations are that have already been done that you want to do and how that may impact your future. Number three is going to be credits. Now, obviously, credits could be something as far as the home inspection and repairs, but what I'm talking about credit wise is more towards agent compensation or potential rate buy downs if you are financing the property. Now, when it comes to agent compensation, as a buyer, you sign a buyer broker agreement where you're basically stating during a transaction, you as the buyer will now pay the agent that is representing you. As part of that, most agents and buyers are directing the agents to ask for that compensation to be paid by the seller as part of the negotiation. We will pay you X for the house if you are also willing to take care of the agent fees or some of the other things. So that's something I would be very mindful of, trying to push that back and make sure that the seller is paying for it. It used to be where the seller would basically sign a higher fee with a listing agent on the front end, and the listing agent would potentially share some of that with a buyer's agent during the process. Now that things have decoupled, the onus is really on the buyer in the offer stage to ask as part of the offer that their agent compensation gets paid for by the seller. So that's something very important to make sure being mindful of so you don't get a random bill down the road or there's any miscommunication with your agent. Now, the other part of credits is if you're financing a transaction. Most people only worry about the purchase price, but I can tell you when it comes to financing and when it comes to closing costs, I would be more worried about the interest rate now. Now that the market has slowed, lenders are being very competitive. They're all fighting for a smaller pool of buyers. So a lot of what we're seeing are lender-sponsored rate buy downs or different programs where lenders are competing on rates as far as closing cost credits and opportunities for buyers to save some money. Now, one thing to be mindful of, if you're getting, let's say, a $500,000 house and you negotiate it down $10,000 for $490, yes, that may save you $60, $70, $80 a month on a mortgage payment. But if that $10,000 is taken as a credit and applied to a rate buy down instead, you're now saving hundreds a month, depending on how the rate buy down is structured in the first or second year, or whatever the option is that you come up with on the lender. Most people do not stay in a home for the duration of the 30 years. Your average person, it's usually around 6 to 8 years before they move again. So knowing that a lot of the interest and payments is going to be front loaded, it doesn't really do you much getting a lower sales price to then just pay smaller amounts monthly. I rather pay a slightly higher amount on the sales price and get a credit to make sure that my monthly expenses are as low as possible. And one great way to achieve that is through a buy down of the rate. Now, those are the three main things that I would consider, especially in the current market. If I'm talking to clients of how we should approach the second half of the year, a lot of that is also going to work around the school year and other things to keep in mind, which we talk a lot about on my monthly market updates. So be sure to check those out. One final piece I will leave you with is, over the past 15 years, helping people buy homes, generally we like to approach it of the 85% rule. Most homes are never going to be perfect. And maybe the house is perfect, but the lot or the yard isn't great, or the neighborhood isn't exactly what you want, or vice versa, or it's slightly too high, or there's some repairs that need to be done, but you love the layout. There's always some combination where it's never a home run. That's not to say that it's not. There are plenty of times that buyers just absolutely find the perfect home for them. But one way to set proper expectations when you're looking and talking to an agent and kind of going about the process is, whether it's just you or you and your significant other or family, whoever is making the decisions, put down a list of everything that's important to you of the home. Think through the things that are absolutely non-negotiables. And as you're looking at properties, are those really non-negotiables, or do they kind of move around to just being part of the wish list? The objective in all of it is to try to get 85% of the things that you're looking for. And what we found is that typically leads to overall happiness in your living arrangement. It's when you try and force too much and really start removing things from the list to get into a home out of fear or competitive nature, whether it's multiple offers or there's duress from something else, that's where we see things go awry. But as the market has shifted and put in slightly more power back in the buyer's hands, these are just some of the things that I would be mindful of. A few tips and tricks that I'm currently working through with my buyers. But if there's anything you guys are thinking differently or how you're approaching home buying, I'd love to hear it. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions as far as what we typically do, as far as our process and how we work with buyers. I hope you found this information valuable, and happy house hunting. See you all in the next one. Thanks.